Hello. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Breaking Barriers, Navigating Latinx and LGBTQIA Identities at Work. We are really excited to have you here. And I have two great panelists who are going to be joining me today. And I hope you really enjoy this conversation. Just as a reminder, we have our comment section, which is open. Please feel free to put in any questions that you may have. Feel free to put any comments in. And actually right now, as I go over some of my identities, I would love to see if anybody else who's watching shares those identities with me. So my name is Vanessa Bowling Adrian. I am HACER's Vice President of Executive Programs. And I actually shared some of my identities last year at our Leadership Pipeline program, which is coming up again this October. We will hear more about that later. And I really want to know who else identifies like I do. You don't have to have all of the identities, but if you are any of these identities, if you identify as any of them, please just put a comment. So first of all, I am a woman. Any other women out there, feel free to comment. I identify as queer. Any other queer people out there? I am also biracial. And I'm also a plus size person. I know at LPP, I asked people to also cheer if they heard something. And I got tons of women. I got a few queer people, a few biracial people, and nobody really wanted to identify with plus size, but I am a very proud plus size woman. And I hope that there's someone in the comments who is going to be embracing that identity today too. So I'm going to start by introducing my panelists. I know we have a lot to discuss, so I want to make sure that we have enough time to do that. Jose de Jesus Gonzalez, also known as EZ, is an Associate Vice President at Best Buy. A native of Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, he has spent most of his lifetime in East Los Angeles, California. He has worked in the retail industry for over 18 years, starting as seasonal staff and quickly evolving in his purpose, passion for serving, learning, innovating, and problem solving. He has served multiple roles in sales, customer service, operations, supply chain, strategy, and special projects, with the most recent as Associate Vice President. A constant learner, during his free time, he loves reading, listening to podcasts, exercising, meditating, spending time with family, volunteering, and enjoys outdoor nature activities, especially his favorite national parks. Welcome, EZ. Next, you're welcome. I'm going to have to hear your podcast list also. I need to know. I need something new. I am also going to introduce Adrian Gonzalez Sierra. He is a senior BRG consultant at Capital One. He also served as global diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist at Chemonics International, where he focused on engaging a diverse global workforce and creating an inclusive company for employees to grow, draw on their unique backgrounds, and bring their best selves to the workplace to promote meaningful change around the world. He began his career as a musical theater performer in New York City and Japan, and served as social entrepreneurship consultant at various projects in Nepal and Australia, where he worked in building the economic and social capacity of elders, refugees, and Aboriginal communities. Originally from Monterrey, Mexico, Adrian serves as vice chair of the board at Planned Parenthood of Metropolitan Washington and is a former Human Rights Campaign Global Fellow. Be sure to be on the lookout for his performances with the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington, D.C. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you, Vanessa.
You are very welcome. I am really looking forward to catching one of your performances. I am in the DC area at our headquarters, and I had an uncle who actually sang on the in the chorus as well. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Oh, then we need to talk about it afterwards.
Yes, please. Afterwards. So I did introduce both of you as I read your bios, right? I read what we see about you on paper. But we all know that there's so much more about a person than that small portion that will fit on that paper. Could you each take just a few minutes to identify yourselves using your preferred pronouns and how you personally identify?
Yeah, thank you.
Easy.
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. So as you shared, my name is Jose de Jesus Gonzalez, pronouns he, him. I'm a queer Latino, born in Jalisco, Mexico, grew up in East Los Angeles. And, I've always known I didn't fit into the normal traditional hetero or straight dominant idea, nor have I identified as one single term of LGBTQIA like letter. And so it's a very diverse, complex spectrum. And I'm still learning about myself and don't want to be confined to one single definition of LGBTQIA plus. And in my formative years, because I was born in Mexico, I struggled with communication early on and school. I was also overweight and so therefore was bullied growing up. I also suffered from anxiety and depression, panic attacks. I could not speak or defend myself. And I know that everyone goes through depression and or anxiety at some point in their life, but it's different when you live with it every day and you can't control it. And to this day, I still live with it, but I've learned how to live with it, manage, find balance through diet, exercise, reading time in nature, 23 minutes of meditation every day, except on the weekends because I do wake up later. But it's a must do during the week for sure to keep me centered. And so I, to many people, sometimes come across as calm and collected with great accomplishments. Yet my story and my insight is not always visible because I've learned to embrace it. I've learned to embrace my experience, including the hidden disabilities that can turn into superpowers. And so I do believe that for like everyone can do the same thing if we as a society can create change and create environments that truly foster diversity, inclusion, and equity. So my experience and my story created my purpose. And for that, I will continue to do whatever I can to pay it forward and make a difference in the world. So that gives you a little bit deeper insight about who I am and the intersectionality of my experience.
Thank you, Easy. And I really appreciate you sharing that. I heard superpowers. I definitely want to hear more about that a little bit later. If you could tell us some more about your superpowers. But right now, Adrian, I would love to hear more about you.
Of course. So my name is Adrian Gonzalez Sierra. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a proud gay Mexican. Um, Opposite to Easy, I was born in El Paso but grew up in Monterrey, Mexico, where my all of my family still lives. So I also have kind of the experience of being away from home from a very early age, from my parents, my siblings. And I think of my identities at the intersection in terms of my activism of sexual and reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, and I also love identifying as a grandson, a son, a gunkle, which is like a gay uncle, and really like a family guy.
I love my gunkles, so I definitely appreciate you embracing that. So I do want to take just a minute for everybody who's watching, just to reiterate that we shared our intersections, we shared our identities. The LGBTQIA plus community is a very, very large community, and we are only a small portion of it. So I do want to make sure that you know that just because something pertains to us does not mean that it will pertain to everybody within the community. So I just want to give that disclaimer as we are sharing our personal experiences. Some of these experiences are very common in the LGBTQIA plus community. And it may open your eyes to something that you never knew one of your colleagues is experiencing. But do know that we are not speaking for the entire community when we answer any questions or we have this conversation. I also really quickly want to say LGBTQIA plus is a very, very long term. If you ever hear us say LGBTQ or LGBTQ plus, know that we are meaning to say everybody. We are trying to include everybody. It just may be a little bit quicker to say, and I don't want anyone to feel as if we are not talking about them because we don't say it fully. All right, with that, let's talk about coming out. Coming out is always, it's one of those things that I know for me was stressful, right? I am a millennial, and I came out at a time when it wasn't as accepted as it is now. And I every time I would go to a new position, or I would go to right before I came here, I was at a nonprofit called Equality Maryland, which is no longer around, but they were the state's Maryland's leading LGBTQ civil rights organization. And I called myself professionally gay because you just assumed that I was in the LGBTQ community if you came into contact with me. And if you were coming to me in my professional capacity, I knew that you most likely were an ally. Well, it was petrifying leaving that professional gay bubble and coming to an organization where I didn't know anybody, right? It's so easy to get comfortable where we are. And I remember, and I'm going to call her out because I think that she needs to be called out. Our chief research officer, Dr. Lisette Garcia, she had the office next to mine, and I know my first week on the job, I heard her talking about the Human Rights Campaign and talking about the our corporate our CII, Corporate Inclusion Index, and hearing that conversation and hearing her reference HRC in such a positive way, and I knew she was an ally, and I knew I had found the right place for me. So I know that we've talked about coming out. It's something that you have to do multiple times, but Easy, could you tell me about your first professional coming out story and how that impacted your coming out in the future?
Yeah, and first, thank you for sharing your experience. I do wish that we do get to a period where you don't actually have to come out, in a world where it's anchored around compassion and love, where diversity is embraced and people can thrive. So there's definitely a lot of work ahead. And so back to the question, because coming out can be exhausting. And so for me, it is exhausting to know that if you don't constantly share or come out, because people see me as hetero first. And so therefore the microaggressions, the assumptions, the discrimination, the bias, the ignorance, or offensive language, and or like the conversations that take place can inherently and unconsciously like keep in place non-inclusive and unsafe environments. So for me, I'm grateful for Best Buy, because if it wasn't for Best Buy and how intentional they are in creating safe and inclusive environments, I don't know that I would have been comfortable or would have felt safe in coming out, sharing who I am, to be able to bring my full self to work. And so one of Best Buy's inclusive behaviors is vulnerability. And through a workshop, a safe space, an environment, I was able to share not just coming out or coming out, but who I really was, because I had hit everything and was holding on to everything uh, for a really long time. So that was my experience with coming out and how I think about it.
Thank you, Easy. I'm happy to go next. First, I would just like to say that coming out comes with a certain privilege, and that is the privilege of like passing to begin with. Um, I feel like for me, I was giving gay vibes forever since ever since I can remember. So like people knew what time it was when I was in kindergarten. And so I don't know that there was a need necessarily to come out. And then I have a similar experience like Vanessa, where my first professional job was as a performer at Disneyland, where being gay is almost expected. And then from there, my next job was at the Human Rights Campaign, where also queerness is just part of the everyday conversation. So moving to my first like non-gay job, um, I was looking for the cues around me, and it's always that that little rainbow flag on someone's desk, or people who just quite frankly approach me because I walked in looking so gay, just to welcome me. Um, I sometimes go by Juan Gabriel's motto, which is "Lo que se ve no se pregunta." So it's almost like I don't remember actively coming out at work because there was just not a big enough closet for me to be in to begin with.
Yeah, one should be in closets. So, but I really do. It's very interesting that you brought up. It comes with the privilege, right? I come out. I definitely. Easy also mentioned that he is passing, right? So I think that's something that we really need to think of as a community as well. Is that that is a privilege, right? And that is something that we need to work on. So I appreciate that. Thank you both. And did either of you have someone like that, Dr. Lisette Garcia, who really, I know you mentioned the rainbows on the doors and things like that, people utilizing pronouns and really making it more of a safe place. But even if you didn't have that privilege of, and I use privilege very lightly, of coming out, is there somebody who really made you feel comfortable in being yourself and being authentic as an LGBTQIA individual, and especially as a Latinx LGBTQIA plus individual?
Yeah, when so Vanessa, when I think about if there was someone or something, sometimes it's a combination of things. I know I mentioned earlier that Best Buy definitely holds that special place for me, but also the leaders that supported me and championed me since day one. And so, too many to list for sure, from my direct leaders that believed in me to like the employee resource group and that community and the ERG leadership team, the inclusion, diversity, and equity team, like, you know, the special projects and development opportunities that I had. Um, and so it's not one thing. I think for me, it was really an ecosystem of things. But I do fundamentally believe that it takes one person, sometimes one leader to believe in you, to spark that momentum and unleash someone's superpower. So, you know, one person can fundamentally make the difference. And I want to continue to be that and do that for others to unleash what I mentioned earlier, each individual's gift and superpower. So for me, it's a combination of things as I think about the question of, is there someone or something?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely, I remember the person, her name is Melissa Logan, Senior Vice President at Chemonics, my previous company. And she had the practice of grabbing coffee with new associates, new employees. And so during my first week, we went out to Starbucks and I had a speaking engagement where I was going to speak about the LGBTQ situation in Mexico the following week. And so I mentioned that I was taking the day off to do this event, and she got so excited. She wanted me to write a blog about it. She connected me with other people within the company who might be interested, and just seeing how excited she got about this opportunity really made me feel that my most authentic selves, or my dimensions of diversity that I was bringing to the table, were valued at the company. And quite frankly, from there, it was an amazing journey, because I started at work as a risk management and compliance specialist. And it is through that conversation that I ended up helping Chemonics build their own diversity and inclusion office, which is the work that now I do full time. And it really started on week one, with her strong support. And I think that's what allyship really looks like. Going out of your way to connect someone in your organization and make them shine, I thought was very generous.
And imagine if you hadn't have had that coffee with her, right? Your life would have been so different if you didn't feel comfortable being so authentic, and really her making that space for you to be authentic is really important as well. So Adrian, I'm actually gonna stick with you.
Mhm.
How can LGBTQIA plus professionals navigate the challenges of coming out to their team members and supervisors?
That is such a great question. And I want to speak a little bit more about coming out and the way it resonates with me. Um, for me, the coming out experience does have an undertone of trauma, of anxiety, of having to do something, or just really putting yourself out there in a way that makes you feel so vulnerable, that I have grown, mentally and emotionally. I am moving away from the coming out narrative, and I really start framing my life story, my experiences, and who I am as letting people in. And so I don't think that my colleagues, my supervisors, they don't deserve necessarily me coming out to them the way I came out to my parents, because that's not the relationship that we have. And if we get to a point where we have that level of trust, they might earn that access to my story. But the way I like to frame it for myself is letting in instead of coming out. And so how do I navigate it? With simple things like, hey, I have a show next weekend with the Gay Men's Chorus. I don't have to come out, but you're invited if you want to come to the show. Or just talking about the weekend, it's really about letting them in. Sometimes it's just that little flag on your desk, or it might be a photo or a comment about how great Pride was during the weekend. But to me, coming out just carries a lot of weight. And I don't think, like, it was hard enough to come out to a family, to actually think that we need to be coming out to just random people at work. Like, I love my people, but no, that's too much emotional weight for me.
I absolutely love that. And honestly, I'm sure there's someone else who's watching right now who just had the same aha moment that I did with you sharing that. It's like, you're right. I don't have to come out. You guys can just hear what I'm saying. You can listen. If I let you in, you know that I have a wife and kids, right? I love that. I absolutely love that. Easy. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything. If not, I'll go on to the next
Yeah,
question. But
no,
thank you.
no, I love that perspective. And so I personally can make a universal like recommendation because it's very individual and very personal. And because there are some people that like don't believe in coming out or the idea of coming out, because it could have, like Adrian mentioned, um, a lot underneath, from implications to the negative connotations to the experience, etc. So here's my point of view from personal experience. I do believe that uh, in order to build trust, critical for both the relationship that you have with your team, but also your supervisor and your supervisors, you have to be able to be vulnerable so you can bring your full self. So not necessarily coming out, but sharing through moments like Adrian mentioned, who you really are. Because if your team and your supervisor don't know who you really are as a human, then how can we expect them to build trust with us? So not only does not having trust make your job that much more difficult, but it also prevents you from setting the tone to an inclusive and safe environment for others. So you'll be surprised how powerful it is to slow down, to get to know someone else's story, someone else's experience, their values, their truth. You can empower others to unleash, and that's how you build trust. So I would agree with what Adrian shared, and that would be how I think about it.
Wonderful. So Izzy, I'm gonna stay with you for this next question. How can employers ensure a supportive and inclusive work environment for LGBTQIA plus employees, especially when they embrace multiple identities and intersections?
Yeah, so first, I'll recognize that there isn't one universal intersection or one experience. Everyone's story is unique, and there are many intersections. Some may be visible and some may not. And then, second, to recognize that intersectionality is a gift, a superpower, and there are many things that employers can do. One that comes to mind would be like the intentional collaboration across ERGs and the employee resource groups, acknowledging with moments just like we're doing today, having a conversation about the intersection about between queer Latinos, or how about an intersection between a queer female who also is Black and disabled? That is a very different and rich intersection. And so I mentioned four ERGs in that example: the Pride ERG, the Women's ERG, the Black ERG, and the Disabilities ERG in that example. So being really intentional with your ERGs and the collaboration between ERGs, because if you don't get the opportunity to support and acknowledge without creating those spaces, those communities, and those conversations to take place where people feel safe to share their story and championing the diversity of the intersections from underrepresented groups. So those are some things that come to mind that employers can do.
Not shying away from having those discussions speaks volumes. Right. So, Adrian, I'm going to ask, have you ever felt or been made to feel like you had to identify either as Latinx or LGBTQIA plus, and how did you handle that?
I would say I have made the choice to lean more heavily on one identity or another. And it's usually because of my safety when I make that conscious decision. So the simple answer is no. No one has asked me to be one thing or the other. And if they were to ask me that, it would be like a huge red flag for me, because there is no way to separate who I am. Like, all of my different dimensions of diversity make me Adrian, and I am not willing to entertain the idea of separating it to please someone else. However, my previous employer had operations in 87 countries, many of which had anti-LGBT legislation where it was criminalized, some of them even with death penalty. And so when it came to safety and security for myself, I would consciously decide, first, to go or not go to that specific country, and secondly, to remove my nail polish, like do what I had to do to pass. That is the only situation in which I do it, and quite frankly, it is very personal. Something that I really appreciate from my company is that safety and security, they saw themselves as their duty was to care for us and provide us with all of the information necessary to decide whether or not we wanted to accept an assignment in any given country. Once I had all the information, I made my own decision. So that's when I've done it. It's not easy, and I do feel like when you're suppressing an aspect of your personality, you don't get to give yourself fully.
So I'm really glad that you brought up the nail polish because I've been looking at your nails and they are absolutely beautiful. So I did want to highlight them really quickly
Thank you.
before going back over to Easy. And I really appreciate that transparency, right? It's not always safe. It's not always safe for any of our intersections, right?
Mhm.
And really having your company allow you to make that decision and not force you to go somewhere where you know you're not going to be safe being
Mhm.
authentically you is it's really important, right? They didn't either just say, well, you have to go, or well, they're gay, they're not going, right?
Mhm.
They gave you that choice to make that decision on your own and gave you the information that you needed to make that decision. I think that is extremely important for employers to recognize and realize and not make these decisions based on their assumptions.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. Easy. How can Latinx LGBTQIA plus employees and allies create a network of support within their workplaces?
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. First, get involved intentionally to learn about the not just learn about allyship, but learn about like the history, the stories, the people through employee resource groups is a great place to start, but not limited to employees resource groups. You can read books, podcasts, articles, and lastly, a powerful one to go out of your way and meet people that are outside of your normal circle. You can learn so much about like others, learn so much about the bias and the blind spots that you had no idea we had, which will then in turn make you a more effective ally. So be resilient and curious. Otherwise, if you do nothing, then we're complying with the status quo, and then that's not going to create the change that is needed for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Adrian, did you want to add anything to that? No.
Um,
So I do want the audience, we are looking for questions. I'm going to open it up for questions in just a minute. So I want to make sure we could just continue talking forever. I warned them earlier before we started that I love to talk. Um, so please feel free to drop your questions in. We are really looking forward to hearing your thoughts, hearing your ideas, your comments, your questions, and we will get to them in just a few minutes. So please go ahead and add those now. So, Adrian,
yes.
in light of the anti-LGBT and violently anti-trans laws that have been popping up all over the country, what measures can employers take to protect their LGBTQIA plus employees and maintain an inclusive workplace, especially in states where these legislations are being passed, especially where some of the legislation that's being passed is not only, it's intersecting multiple identities. It's not just because you're LGBTQIA. It could be because you are an immigrant. It could be because so many other things. How do we tackle that?
Yeah, I think I'll go back. It's funny that this question is being asked to me, and I'll go back to the duty of care. I think the duty of care is something that needs to be brought to the front whenever we're thinking about the safety and security of our employees. So, for instance, this fall, there are a few high profile diversity and inclusion conferences being held in Florida, for example. And I would say that it is our employer's responsibility to provide all of us with the necessary information to again make our decision. Do we want to go or not based on the current state? So that's one way in which we can demonstrate support. The other thing that has been very powerful, and I'll draw from my experience in my previous company, having employees all over the world, it was very important that all of them knew from the CEO each Pride month, we would send out a communication saying, regardless of what the law says in your country, at Chemonics, you are welcome, you are cared for. We want you regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression of sexual characteristics. It was a very simple message, um, but it really resonated. And every year we would get responses from associates in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, just all over, who felt seen and said, I never thought I was going to work for a company that cared for me, fully understanding that that doesn't mean that they can come out of the closet in the office or live authentically because of the risk it presented to them. But there is another way to share just a very strong message of support, does make a difference.
Easy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, first, I'll share that I'm not an expert here, and I do still have a lot to learn to continue to be an effective ally, as it's an ongoing journey and not a destination. So I'm not the best to be able to speak on this, but what I do think is to build on what Adrian shared, is to be vocal about your stance to the safety and support of your employees. In examples in ways that we support our LGBTQIA plus coworkers, families, and loved ones when they need support include non-discrimination policies, our ERG community, inclusion, diversity and equity, and support groups, benefits that include life solutions and employee assistant programs, where employees can get 24/7 support for events and day-to-day life issues, and including toolkits that provide resources, policy information, and guidance to create a safe and respectful environment for gender expansive employees and support employees through a gender transition are a couple of examples that come to mind.
So Easy, I'm going to ask, and I know you did just share a bunch of resources, but is there any advice, and this is really for both of you, is there any advice that you would give to those who are watching, who are in some of these states and they're struggling? I really loved, Adrian, how you mentioned that there are some people in some of these countries that are not necessarily accepting of them, and they can't be out in the workplace, but just having that one message really gave them that hope, and they felt that they were being seen. Is there any advice you would give to people who are kind of in that same situation, and what internal company resources would you recommend they seek out?
So I know. Oh, go ahead, Easy.
No, I was going to defer it to you, as I mentioned already some of the benefits.
Awesome. So I'll take another approach. I think the benefits one is one that really helped me decide to move to Capital One, because when I looked at those benefits, the way they were expressed, they were non-gender. They talked about spouses and parental leave and support for fertility treatments and adoption without necessarily talking about like the heteronormative version. So I said, okay, they got their act together. So that was I'm with you, Easy, that is a great way to show support. There is also what I would call the soft side of things. For instance, at Capital One, we have very robust Slack communities, and I have been particularly touched with a few of them. Some of them are, for instance, for caregivers. We have a community for parents of LGBTQ children, where a lot of this sense of community is created. Some of them are in Texas, some of them are in Florida. They build community. There's another one for trans and queer plus associates that has also been a really safe space for individuals to meet one another, to discuss whatever people might be going through in the moment. And the necessary memes and all of those things, but being intentional about creating these more informal communities has also been a lifesaver. And I know, because I have witnessed it myself. For many people, particularly in the trans and queer community, finding that space at work has been life changing, because now they have like a community with hundreds of people that's supporting one another. And so that's another way to complement the more kind of policy related benefits and other aspects of having an inclusive, I don't know, employee manual. There is also that community aspect to it.
Absolutely. I know, not necessarily work related, but when we were choosing a school, a preschool for our son at the time, it was really important to us to have gender neutral terms, which they didn't have. It was mother and father. And, you know, I do like I did my whole life, and crossing out black, white, whatever, and putting my own box, um, crossed it out and said mother, right? He has two mothers. Uh, and because I was vocal about that, they did end up changing it. They
Mhm.
changed it now to gender inclusive terminology, which was really important. But that goes to say that you never know who's listening when you say these things. You never know who is actually going to make changes because of your comment, because of your request. Um, and really just to continue to be as authentic as you possibly can. So we do have some questions that have come in. So I am going to start with EZ. Have you had a moment in leadership that had you realize that the way you led made a difference?
Yeah, without getting too emotional, because then all kinds of stories came to mind, is for sure. I never thought that being vulnerable and sharing my story and my experience would be able to empower others to feel safe, number one, but also share their experience. Because I do think that there's something special when others can feel like they can come to work as their full, like complete selves, as who they are. So I think vulnerability for sure. There's many moments where I would have never thought that um, those moments would be critical, significant, like moments for others as well as they were for me. So for sure, leading with, I have this idea of I'm a servant leader because I want to help others, and so that is the way that I lead my team, along with all of the other responsibilities that come with making sure that we're driving everything else that you're responsible, but you're a people leader first, and so vulnerability definitely found that place in my heart and has definitely made a difference. So long-winded way of saying yes, many stories come to mind, and yeah.
So, Adrian,
Yes.
using the terminology that you coined, this next question says, in what ways do your ERGs invite in?
Okay, first I'll say I didn't coin that. I just shared it here, and I have a great example. Actually, my not my the LGBTQ business resource group at Capital One came up with a workshop titled "Letting In versus Coming Out," and they submitted the workshop to Out and Equal last year. It was selected, and it was a session that was completely sold out. Like there were people outside the room just listening in because of how attractive it was. We then brought the session back to Capital One, and what we've realized is that each one of us carries aspects of our diversity that we don't share. It's not just the LGBTQ community. There are people who are veterans and they don't want to share it, or who grew up with a military family. There are individuals with disabilities. There are people who don't want to talk about religion. There are people who don't want to talk about the refugee status or DACA status. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so the idea here is that by letting people in, you take control of your story, and it's as I mentioned earlier, it's not a demand, it's nothing that is expected from you. It's something that has to be earned from your colleagues, from your supervisors, and it has more of like a easy way to invite people to your life. So specific examples about BRGs using this language, I think the one that resonates the most or that I can remember are particularly with individuals with disability. But many times it's also about caregiving duties, for example. Hey, I'm taking care of my elder parent and this is going on. And sharing all of that is also letting people into your life. So I feel like we, outside of the programming organized by the LGBTQ business resource group, where it was really focused in this dimension of diversity, um, there are other ways to take this concept and make it useful for associates.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have a question from YouTube, and I'm going to frame it in the perspective of within ERGs at your company. Do you foresee religious groups becoming more accepting? Have you seen any progress in that sector? And what can we do internally to make progress within religious ERGs with the LGBTQIA plus community?
So I know I'm happy to take a first
Yeah.
stab. I know that one of the most important things, particularly as it pertains to religious based BRGs or an interfaith BRG, is really to build the guardrails so that the group is still a resource to the business, right? And so those are organizations of employees where the company really benefits from stating very clearly what is allowed and what is not allowed. What I have found, particularly with interfaith business resource groups, is that they are very much open to have intersectional conversations. And so the opportunities are right there. Um, I think here in DC, I'm based in DC, there is an out bishop, Jim Robinson, I believe is his name, like inviting the bishop to have a conversation and really to start talking about different perspective. What does it mean to be out and Catholic? And so as long as there is a lot of respect, I think that building those intersectional opportunities are really drivers of change. And you would be surprised about how open some of these interfaith groups are to have the conversations.
So I love Gene Robinson, and when you all have that discussion, just give me a Capital One ID. I'll just sneak in really quickly. I'll be there, and then just kidding, Capital One. I'm not doing that. No, but I do love Gene Robinson, and I think that is really important. Thank you. So I'm going to start with easy on this next question, but both of you are welcome to answer. How does mental health intersect with the experiences of LGBTQ individuals, and what are some resources or support systems available?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an intersection from a mental health, and everyone's experience is unique and different. So first, to acknowledge that the intersection between my mental health experience and someone else may be very different. But at the same time, how do we acknowledge in a way where we have the conversation and how we support the intersection and the experiences that exist? And so I think, I mentioned some of the benefits earlier that we as a company, Best Buy, has in place in order to support not just LGBTQIA+, but also individuals that are going through events, difficult day-to-day life decisions, and or family that is going. So we definitely have employee assistant programs in place where there's an ability to connect with somebody 24/7, uh, regardless of the situation that you're going through. And so there's definitely an intersection there, and there's many things that organizations can do to support anybody that's going through mental health. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, at this, I am a millennial too, Vanessa, and I feel like probably most queer people that grew up in our generation, and probably before that too, in this like very straight world, is carrying some level of trauma and experiences that need to be unpacked. So earlier, Easy talked about being vulnerable, and I think that is such a great leadership quality. And I also think of it about the use of self. So using yourself as an avenue to support others or to bring light to certain aspects of our experiences. And so I am very vocal about my mental health journey with the people who are around me, with people on my team. And that creates a supportive environment. In my team, if someone needs to take a wellness day, it is so easy because each of us is committed to make sure that we have the space that we need to be well, emotionally and mentally. And so I think that continuing to normalize therapy and just a focus on being well, it's good for associates, and I actually think it's also good for business too, because if you get to pause, recharge, and come back, you'll deliver better results. And so I think that it's really the full circle of benefits gets completed when we pause for mental health.
And I completely agree about that trauma. I know that empathetic leadership it goes a long way, right? I know on our team, if you need a day, come back recharged, right? If you
Mhm.
just need to lay in your bed and be to yourself all day, if you need to get outside in nature, go to one of those national parks, whatever it is to recharge yourself. I know water recharges me, so if I could go to the beach easily in a day, I would do it.
Me
Um,
too.
but but really having that leadership that really understands, and also I don't have the statistic off the top of my head, but having supportive mental health care reduces LGBTQIA suicide rates. So
Mhm.
just being there and being supportive of someone's mental health, and understanding that just because you don't uh, identify the same way, and I don't mean identity as in these intersections that we're talking about. I mean it as in, well, I can do all of this and not be stressed, but this person is stressed, right? We need to remove ourselves from the equation. If someone is telling you they're stressed, they're stressed. If
Mhm.
someone is telling you that they are having some issues right now, they're having issues. Whether you think that you would have issues in that case or not, it doesn't matter. I know so many times we insert ourselves into other people's situations, and people, when it comes to mental health, really need to take yourself out of that equation, because it's not about you at all. It's not. Um, no one's being offensive to you, right? It is really about that person. And if they are telling you this, you are a safe person, first of all. And second of all, they really need the help.
Mhm.
So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to do one last question, and then we are going to have to end this wonderful conversation. But this question is from LinkedIn. I believe storytelling and sharing experiences is a powerful driver of empathy and understanding, and can be helpful in building safe places, albeit a safe space needs to be created to do that. How are you or your ERGs driving these sometimes difficult conversations around LGBTQIA or other identity specific nuances?
Yeah, I
And
think
who?
I'll share a couple of quick examples that come to mind. I know Best Buy holds these candid conversations, and In some cases, there are difficult conversations that need to take place. And where I'm going with this is you need to intentionally have those conversations, whether it's through the ERGs. We also have what we call lunch and learns, where we bring on guests to share their experience, their story. We intersect across ERGs. So it's not just an ERG sharing a story. There's like intersection taking place. So it does take a space like what we're having today to have a conversation, to then have others raise their hand and say, I have a story to share too, or I can relate to Adrian as an example, or Vanessa as an example. So then you just you create an ecosystem, and you create environments where people like feel safe to share more about their story, their journey. And then when you do that, you have a more engaged workforce, you have a more productive workforce that could bring their full selves to work. And like, it not only is it the right thing to do to create that environment for employees and individuals, like there's a lot of benefits that come with that. I know Adrian mentioned some of those benefits earlier, but yeah, just being intentional with having difficult conversations, knowing when we hold ourselves hostage to the judgment, then we're gonna stay stagnant and still. Let's have those uncomfortable conversations in a respectful, knowing that I don't know what I don't know. Sometimes I may be the ally, sometimes I may be the impacted person, and sometimes I may be the one that said something that negatively impacted another. And just acknowledging that that is a reality, and you come into the conversation with that mindset, it could create powerful conversations for others to have that same platform.
I love that idea. And the only thing I would add to that, we also hold coffee chats and coffee circles. And sometimes the conversations are really about like Heartstopper, the new show on Netflix. So I also think that they don't always have to be the difficult conversations. What we're doing is very intersectional about saying we're going to have a coffee chat for pansexual individuals. We're going to have a coffee chat for asexual individuals, intersex, the trans and queer community, and so on. And creating that sense of community during normal times also help us to get together in times of crisis and be able to ideate because the seeds have been planted, and we have a community that has already built trust with one another.
Wonderful. Thank you both, Easy, Adrian. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I really love these nuggets that you have given me. I'm sure that everyone watching has taken a lot of nuggets from you as well. I am not a national park person, but if it's a beach national park, I'll be there with you, Easy. And I'm ready to go to the Gay Men's Chorus. Just let me know. Let me know when you will be.
I have a list for you, and you need to come to the West Coast so we can go to the national parks. Also have a list for you on podcast.
Okay, I will hold you to that. I follow up. But thank you both. I really appreciate it, and I will be talking to both of you very soon. So I do want to just add that we are having these really, really important conversations at our upcoming programs as well. So we just had our executive programs in San Francisco about a week ago, and we are going to be having our symposium coming up October 9th through 11th, as well as our leadership pipeline program coming up October 23rd through 25th. These conversations and more will be happening. Our symposium is a best practices symposium for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we really look forward to having these conversations on intersectionality, on Latinidad, having conversations on the LGBTQ plus community, as well as having conversations just about how you can be supportive, how you can be supportive to your team, how you can manage your team and really make these safe spaces. So I really hope that you all will join us. You can go to our website, www.hacer.org, HACR.org, to find out more. And you can always reach out to me or any member of the team if you need additional information. But with that, I hope to see you either in New York or New Orleans. Until then, thank you so much and have a great day. Happy Pride.